The courtroom air felt thick, like a pressure weighing down on my chest. I sat there, exhausted, my fingers gripping the wooden stand in front of me. Across from me, Emily lounged back in her chair, her legs crossed, her nails tapping lazily against the table. She looked completely at ease, like she was enjoying a private joke. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at me. "Mr. Carter, can you state the real reason for your divorce?" I turned to Emily. Her eyes met mine, daring me to back down. She thought she had won. She thought I'd stay quiet. I took a slow breath and said, "Because I was living a lie, and now I'm ready to expose it." Emily's laugh exploded through the room. It wasn't just laughter. It was sharp, mocking, filled with contempt. Some people in the audience chuckled along with her, shaking their heads. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just another husband trying to save face. I didn't flinch. I didn't react at all. Instead, I stood up. Slowly, deliberately. I reached for my tie, pulling it loose, then unbuttoned my shirt, button by button. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. When I finally shrugged the fabric off my shoulders and let it drop onto the table, the reaction was immediate. Silence. Someone in the audience gasped. A woman near the back covered her mouth. Emily's lawyer leaned in toward her, whispering something urgent, but she didn't answer. She just sat there, her smirk frozen in place. My torso was a wreckage of bruises, scars, and fresh cuts. A deep purple bruise stretched from my ribs to my hip, the remains of when Emily had shoved me into the edge of the kitchen counter 2 weeks ago because I didn't listen. A long, jagged scar ran down my left arm last year. She had smashed a glass and held a shard against my skin, daring me to leave. "Go ahead," she had whispered, her breath thick with wine. "See how far you get." The cut near my collarbone was newer, barely healed. She had thrown a ceramic plate at me during an argument over nothing that mattered. Anyway, I had forgotten to pick up the dry cleaning. That was all it took. The plate shattered against my chest, slicing me open. I had stood there, shirt torn, blood trickling down, while she screamed about how useless I was. The judge's gavel slammed down. "What is going on here?" I met his gaze. My voice was steady. "For years I let this happen. Every time she was angry, every time she had too much to drink, every time she thought I looked at her the wrong way, she made sure I paid for it." I looked at Emily. She hurt me. She controlled me. She made me afraid. For the first time, Emily looked afraid. The apartment was quiet when I came home that evening, but it was a quiet I had come to dread. Emily was still out, so I kicked off my shoes, sat down at the kitchen table and tried to unwind. I had just finished a 14-hour shift at the hospital. My hands still trembled from the delicate surgery, but I was proud. I had saved another life that day. When Emily came in an hour later, she didn't say anything about my day. She didn't even notice the dinner I'd set out, the one I'd carefully prepared for us to enjoy. She just walked past it, flopping onto the couch with a sigh. I sat across from her, trying to engage. "How was work?" I asked, expecting her to launch into one of her stories about her latest script, the characters, the twists, but she barely looked at me. "Fine," she muttered, flipping through her phone. The whole thing felt off. I was used to her energy, to her charisma, but tonight she was distant, like she was looking through me rather than at me. That was the first night it happened, the first time I realized something was wrong. She had told me she'd be home at 7 p.m. But it was now 9, and I was sitting there waiting, dinner getting cold. I had asked her why she was late when she came in, and she just shrugged it off. I got caught up. "Don't make a big deal out of it." The way she said it felt like I wasn't supposed to care, like I wasn't supposed to notice. I brushed it off. At the time, we moved on to another conversation, but the feeling lingered. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. She would come home later and later, never giving me a straight answer when I asked where she had been. And when she did speak, it was always vague, just out with some friends, or had to finish a script. But every time I felt this nagging doubt, I couldn't pinpoint it, but something was changing. Then there were the little things. I started noticing how she moved my things around, small things, like my books or my coffee mug. The first time it happened, I thought maybe I had just misplaced something. But then it started happening more frequently. One evening, I walked into the kitchen, and saw the spoon holder moved 6 inches to the left. I asked her why she had moved it. She gave me a casual smile, as if it was no big deal. I thought it looked better this way. But it wasn't just that. I'd come home from work and find a chair in the dining room facing the wrong direction, or the couch cushions rearranged. She always brushed it off, but I knew it was more than just a preference, it was a message. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, groggy from the hospital's endless rotation of surgeries. The apartment was unusually cold, and when I reached out to touch Emily's side of the bed, I found it empty. My heart raced as I got up to look for her. I walked through the dark apartment, calling her name. The only sound was the soft click of my footsteps on the hardwood floor. I found her in the living room, sitting at the desk, writing in her notebook, completely in the dark. I was confused at first. "What are you doing?" I asked. Her response was chilling. "Distant, writing your ending." I thought it was a joke, one of those things she'd say to lighten the mood, but when she didn't laugh, when she didn't even look up from her notebook, it hit me. Something was off, something deep. It wasn't a joke, it was a statement. This wasn't about me not being home on time. This was something far darker. I could feel the pressure building up. It started small, nothing I couldn't explain away. I chalked it up to stress, to exhaustion, to the long hours at the hospital. But over time it became impossible to ignore. The first time it happened, I was in the operating room, right in the middle of a complex procedure. Everything had been going smoothly, until I felt a strange tremor in my hand. At first, it was subtle, but then it grew stronger. My scalpel slipped, cutting deeper than I intended. I couldn't believe it. I had been performing surgeries for years. Never once made a mistake like that, especially not with such an experienced team in the room. I quickly handed over the scalpel to my assistant, trying to hide my panic, but the doubt had already settled in. Why had that happened? I tried to push it from my mind, but the dizziness kept creeping up. I'd stand up from a chair, and suddenly feel like the room was spinning. It wasn't just once, it happened every day. At work, I'd struggle to focus, my mind wandering during critical moments. The fatigue was even worse. After surgeries, I'd come home and crash on the couch, barely able to speak to Emily. It was so unlike me before. I was always active, always doing something. But now, I could barely get through a day without needing a nap. Then came the food poisoning. Emily had prepared dinner, a nice roast chicken. The meal was fine, or so I thought. About an hour after I finished eating, my stomach started to churn. The pain hit me suddenly, sharp and unrelenting. I spent the next few hours vomiting and clutching my stomach, my body racked with fever. When I finally crawled into bed, Emily didn't seem concerned. "You're fine," she said, her voice light, almost dismissive. "You probably ate something that didn't sit right." It didn't make sense. I'd never had a problem with her cooking before. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, but the timing felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A few days later, it got worse. I was administering medication to a patient, a routine procedure, when I suddenly felt dizzy. I tried to steady myself, but my vision blurred for a split second. When I looked back at the syringe, I thought it was correct. I had double-checked the dosage, but somehow, I had given him an overdose. The patient went into cardiac arrest within minutes. I tried to resuscitate him, but he didn't make it. My hands were shaking as I called for help. I had no memory of the injection, no recollection of anything after checking the dosage. The mistake was mine, but I couldn't explain it. How could I not remember such an important detail? That night, I sat at my desk, my head spinning, trying to figure out what was going on. I needed something to make sense of the chaos in my mind. That's when I found it, a hidden file on Emily's computer, buried deep in a folder. The file was titled Eric's Story. I clicked it open, and my blood ran cold. The character in the story was named Eric, a successful surgeon, much like me. But as the story unfolded, Eric's life began to unravel. His hands trembled, his mind faltered, and he lost patient after patient. The final scene, Eric, unable to cope with the pressure, took his own life. It was too much to ignore. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't a coincidence. Emily had been writing my story, writing my downfall. The realization hit me with the force of a blow. Every mistake, every failure, Everything I had experienced in the past months, it was all part of her plan. She had been manipulating me, setting me up to fail. I couldn't take it anymore. Every day felt like I was losing a little more of myself, slipping deeper into a hole I didn't know how to get out of. After finding the file on Emily's computer, there was no denying it. Everything that had been happening wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't stress or bad luck. She had been manipulating me, testing me, breaking me down. Piece by piece, I had to confront her. I needed answers, and I needed them now. She came home later that night, the usual smile on her face, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet confidence, like she knew what was coming. She tossed her bag on the couch, and without a word, I stood up and walked over to her. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I had to do this. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why have you been doing this to me? All of it, everything." Her eyes flicked to mine, and she didn't seem shocked at all. No surprise, no guilt, just that familiar, calm smirk. "How long did it take you to figure it out?" she asked, her voice cool and casual, as if she were discussing the weather. I could feel the weight of her words sinking in. "How long?" I repeated, barely able to keep my composure. "How long were you planning all of this?" She didn't answer at first. She just stood there, looking at me, as though I were some kind of experiment. "I was testing you," she said finally, like it was the most natural thing in the world, pushing you to see how much you could handle before you broke. How long it would take for you to figure it out. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My mind was racing, trying to process what she was saying. Testing me. This whole time, she had been playing a game, watching me fall apart, watching me spiral. All the little things, the accidents, the mistakes, those weren't just coincidences. They were carefully orchestrated. I was trembling now, my breath quickening. "You did all of that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You poisoned me. You made me lose control. You ruined my career." She just shrugged, indifferent. "It wasn't personal. It was just an experiment. Ethan, you made it all so easy, didn't you?" The anger, the confusion, the disbelief, it all crashed over me in an instant. I had to get out of there. I couldn't stay in the same room with her. I turned away and headed for the door, my hand already on the handle, but then I heard her voice. "If you walk out now, I'll call the police and tell them you tried to kill me," she said, her tone so cold it sent a chill down my spine. I froze. My hand gripped the door tighter, my heart racing. "What?" I turned around, unable to believe what I was hearing. She was looking at me with that same cold gaze. "I'll tell them you tried to kill me," she repeated. "You don't think I have proof? I can make it look like you were the one who did it. The police will believe me. Ethan, I'll ruin you." I felt my stomach drop. I thought I had known her, but this was a different side of her. She wasn't just a troubled wife, a woman, acting out of frustration. She was calculating, ruthless. She was a master manipulator. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She had planned this all along, and I had walked right into her trap. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But as I stood there, I realized something. If I left now, I would lose everything. I had known for a while now that I was trapped, but the realization hit me full force when Jacob ended up in a coma. It wasn't just the accident, it was too much of a coincidence, too perfectly timed. 2 days after I told him everything about Emily's manipulation, he was hit by a truck while driving home from work. The police said it was an unfortunate accident, but deep down, I knew. I couldn't prove it, but I knew Emily had something to do with it. She had orchestrated everything, and now my closest friend was fighting for his life because of her. I hadn't told anyone about the dark things I'd discovered. I hadn't told anyone about the file, the scripts Emily had written, where she destroyed a character eerily similar to me. But I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. I needed someone to help me. I reached out to Jacob, and he was the one person who believed me. At least, that's what I thought. But 2 days after our conversation, he was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. I couldn't escape the sickening feeling that Emily was behind it all. There was no other explanation. I wanted to scream, to punch the walls, but I couldn't. I had already lost everything: my career, my reputation, my best friend, and now, Emily was working on taking my sanity too. As if the universe was aligning against me, things only got worse from there. The rumors at work began, small at first, but they grew louder by the day. Whispers about my supposed drug use, my mistakes in the operating room, rumors I knew Emily had planted, just like the others. She was so good at this, so convincing, I couldn't even fight back. No one believed me anymore. I was called in for a meeting at the hospital. The administrators sat across from me, their faces cold and disinterested. They told me they were suspending me while they investigated the rumors. It was all a formality. They were already convinced. They had no evidence of drug abuse, but the whispers were enough to tarnish my reputation. They told me it was a precautionary measure, but I knew what it really meant. It was the beginning of the end. I was no longer the successful neurosurgeon I used to be. I was a liability, a broken man who couldn't be trusted with a scalpel. The worst part was, Emily wasn't even pretending to be concerned anymore. She played the role of the perfect wife for a while, showing up at the hospital to visit Jacob, feigning worry, but she didn't even care. She wasn't there for him. She was there for the performance. She wasn't even pretending to love me anymore. Every time I looked at her, I saw the mask slipping, her cold eyes watching me fall apart. As if that weren't enough, my body began to betray me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept. I barely ate anymore sometimes. Just a piece of toast in the morning, and that was it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing, and I had no one to turn to. Jacob was in a coma, and I couldn't reach out to anyone else. They would just look at me the same way the hospital did, like I was losing my mind. It was too much. Every day felt like a new battle, but it wasn't a battle I could win. Not when Emily was in control of everything. My body was failing, my job was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't see a way out. She had already destroyed my life. Now, I was just waiting for the final blow. The gavel's sound still echoed in my ears. As I sat motionless, my hands gripping the table so hard my knuckles turned white, the judge's words had sealed it. Emily had won, but it wasn't just about money, or property, or the divorce itself. She had won. Every carpenter. My reputation, my credibility, my truth. The whispers around me grew, a suffocating hum that I couldn't escape. I turned to the jury, searching for a single face that might show doubt, regret anything, but they all avoided my gaze. I caught a glimpse of one woman, maybe in her 40s, pressing her lips together, as if she wanted to believe me, but couldn't. She glanced at the documents Emily's lawyer had presented, and just like that, she looked away. I should have seen this coming. Every move Emily made had been calculated, rehearsed. I thought I had exposed her when I stood up and revealed my bruises, when I spoke the truth in front of them all. But the moment she tilted her head and sighed, just sighed, it was like the air shifted. Suddenly, I was the villain. Emily turned to the judge, her voice soft, her expression just right, not too dramatic, not too defensive. Your Honor, I didn't want this to happen. I tried so hard to help Ethan. I begged him to get professional help, but he refused. Lies, all of it. I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could speak, her lawyer had already placed a stack of papers on the judge's desk. Your Honor, these messages show repeated attempts from Mrs. Alex Walker to encourage her husband to seek therapy. In return, his responses became erratic, even aggressive. Furthermore, we have an affidavit from Dr. Raymond Carter, a psychiatrist who reviewed Mr. Walker's behavior and found clear signs of paranoia and psychosis. I gritted my teeth. I had never spoken to Dr. Carter in my life. The judge flipped through the papers, nodding slightly, as if everything suddenly made sense. I could feel the noose tightening around me. And then Emily played her final card. She turned to the jury, clasping her hands together, her voice just the right amount of shaky. I never wanted to come to this, but I was afraid. Ethan started accusing me of things that didn't make sense, poisoning him, sabotaging his career. I only wanted to protect him from himself. A murmur ran through the audience. I shook my head. That's not true. She did poison me. She enough, Mr. Walker, the judge said firmly. I froze. That was it. No more speaking. No more defending myself. And then Emily did what she always did best. She won. The ruling was announced. The case was over. And she walked away victorious. But as she passed me, she leaned in close. her breath warm against my ear. Now, this is the ending I wanted. Then she smiled and walked out, leaving me behind, erased.